Now, the latest in the Afghan peace talks. Moscow is mediating a dialogue between the Taliban and other players. It's a two-day event. Conspicuous by its absence is the Afghan government led by President Ashraf Ghani. On the talking table are several prominent Afghan politicians and at least 10 members of the Taliban. Peace talks, though, do not mean an end to war. Taliban launched a pre-dawn attack on an army base in northern Afghanistan today, killing at least 26 security personnel. In Moscow, Taliban chief negotiator Abbas Stanakzai said that the group does not consider the current Afghan constitution legitimate and that the blueprint was an obstacle to peace. He said that once the US forces withdraw from Afghanistan, the Taliban will not demand political monopoly in order to achieve sustainable peace. He has demanded that the names of Taliban leaders be removed from the US blacklist. Meanwhile, former Afghan President Hamid Karzai welcomed America's efforts to push for peace. He also expressed hope that Pakistan and Afghanistan can forge good relations going forward. In this 8-minute speech that he delivered, Hamid Karzai highlighted the need for peace and unity. He also told the media that he hopes the Afghan government will participate in these talks in the future.
A very good meeting, and officially we'll be talking later on.
Yes.
Yes.
But is that a problem that official Kabul government is not here?
Let's not speak about those things. We hope they will be there someday.
The Afghan government is not present because the Taliban does not recognize them as a legitimate government. They call it America's puppet. Moscow, meanwhile, is very keen on being the power broker, being the mediator for peace. It has to look at its assets in Central Asia. It is looking to leverage its position, and it's also looking to redeem some of the humiliation it faced many decades ago when it had to leave, the Soviet Union had to leave Afghanistan.
Россия, как вы знаете, активно выступает за налаживание межафганского диалога с участием и правительства, и движения талибов, поскольку талибы – это часть афганского общества, и никуда от этого факта не денешься.
Wion's Julia Chapman joining us live from Moscow. Julia, the Taliban attacks continue even as we are talking about peace. How does that work? Have the Taliban given any assurance towards a ceasefire pending a decision on peace?
There's certainly been no word of that yet, and as you say, the violence continues on a daily basis, which is why the Afghan government finds it very difficult and indeed has refused to sit down with the Taliban on this particular occasion. And so we're seeing this meeting taking place here in Moscow between members of the Taliban, representatives of the Taliban, as well as a number of other Afghan politicians, but not notably the actual administration of the president. So there is no high-level talk on that level. They're being hosted here in Moscow, although the Russian government is not actually involved in these talks. This is they are saying an intra-Afghan dialogue and is not being influenced by other partners, although of course the location of Moscow for the place that these talks are being held is very significant. Russia of course hosted back in November some talks between the same groups, but Russia was also involved in them. And the other party that's missing from these talks on this occasion is the US, who has been meeting with the Taliban separately, and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has accused the US of holding secret talks with the Taliban and of trying to dominate the agenda and the peace process on their own.
In fact, I was going to come to that. So the Russians say that the US has been holding secret talks. The US says that Russia is trying to muddle its peace process. This has become another case of one-upmanship. What is to say that the Taliban is not going to play one player against the other?
Well, that's a very good question, and that is certainly a concern. And indeed, in their absence, the Afghan government is very concerned that these high-level talks are being held without them. Although the US, of course, has helped support the Afghan government and does acknowledge that they are the legitimate government, they are still going ahead and holding talks separately with the Taliban. And then we're seeing the Taliban come here to Moscow and hold separate talks. So it's very difficult to know whether they can be trusted. In those talks in Qatar last month between the US and the Taliban, some sort of draft agreement was formed, but there have been some serious concerns from the Afghan government on that matter. There are concerns that the Taliban is demanding the dismantling of the Afghan army, and that is something that the Afghan government simply refuses to do because, of course, the Taliban says that the US, having helped the Afghan government formed this army, formed this military, that it should not be in play anymore. It should be dismantled completely and rebuilt from scratch. And that's something that the Afghan government simply refuses to do because they are very concerned about security in the country and indeed in the region, because, as you say, there are attacks still going on a daily basis in Afghanistan.
Julia Chapman, thanks very much. This is a two-day process. We'll keep track of what happens there in Moscow in the Intra-Afghan peace dialogue, as they're calling it.